This is Stories of Impact, the art and science of human flourishing. In every episode, we travel the world to explore intersections of science and spirituality. I'm your host, writer Tavia Gilbert, and along with journalist Richard Sergey, every first and third Tuesday, we look through a new lens at old traditions, hear from new generations as they dream up innovative solutions, and learn new ways to make sense of modern life. Last week, we introduced you to Dr. Barry Billingsley in a conversation about her work studying big questions in religious and science education and her efforts to support multidisciplinary classrooms. This week, we're back with the second part of that episode, exploring another Big Questions in the Classroom initiative, in conversation with 7 educators who are advancing Dr. Billingsley's work through a collaborative research project on religion and worldviews. Together, these research leaders are not only introducing innovative ideas into traditional curriculum, but they're educating the educators in how to teach them. Why does the classroom need a refresh? We'll start with Dr. Michael Reiss, project lead and professor and chair of science education at University College London.
We are definitely at a time where the model of a good teacher and a good student is changing and needs to change. We still have a model of education around the world now that derives from the mid-19th century in Western Europe, where there is an expert teacher at the front who pretty much talks, demonstrates, students pay attention, write down, learn. That is remarkably true still for the large majority of classrooms. And of course, for those of us who are adults, that's bizarre, because that's no longer how any of us learn. I mean, we don't. We just, whether it's, reading a good book or looking some of the internet or discussing something with a colleague, that's how you learn.
Not only does Dr. Reiss critique education at large, he agrees with Dr. Billingsley's opinion that science education is not doing as well as it needs to in order to prepare students of today for modern life.
One of the things that has really changed in my time as a science educator is people's attitude to whether science fundamentally is about truth. So when I started, this was just an unquestioned assumption that if you wanted to know about the natural world, science was the way to do it. And it became obvious to me that for some people, there was a sort of ideological clash, therefore, between scientific truth and other ways they had of understanding the world. We're very good in school science at answering how questions, so a lot of stuff to do with mechanisms, but we're not always quite as good at helping young people to think about more deep questions, and those are often why questions. And one of the problems we have is that we don't always give the bigger picture.
So what's his answer? Along with colleagues we'll hear from today, Dr. Reiss aimed to develop a framework, resources, and training for educators to support their adoption of a religion and worldviews approach to teaching religious education. What is a religion and worldviews approach? It's an effort to move classrooms away from a world religions approach, in which the 6 major religious faiths are narrowly considered, in favor of a religions and worldview approach, which brings into classroom consideration each student's personal values, identity, and culture. That approach is a fresh perspective, centering students' lived experiences, personal engagement, and understanding. Dr. Reiss wanted to devise a framework to help teachers in any school, in any region of the country, to move toward that religion and worldviews approach.
So the good thing about the Big Questions in Classrooms initiative is that it was meant to help teachers and students think, why are we doing this? What's it really all about? Rather than just focusing on the minutiae.
Dr. Trevor Cooling, Professor Emeritus at Canterbury Christ Church University and former chair of the Religious Education Council of England and Wales, joined Dr. Reiss in the project. Dr. Cooling spent much of his 50-year career teaching young students both science and religious education. And in his experience, he says,
To me, science raises all sorts of questions about the place of the scientific endeavour in the modern world. And those questions often aren't looked at all in the curriculum because it focuses on the sort of understanding of the scientific concept rather than the big questions raised by the interpretation and application of that concept. So it does raise huge questions, and I think science teachers being open to those sort of conversations, that's really important because if people go on to be scientists, they have to make decisions that have implications for the wider world. The old approach was largely about conveying information about religious and non-religious traditions. So it was about getting information into children's long-term memory, if you like. The new approach is much more about using information in order to help young people grapple with questions of identity and worldview. And the big thing that we're looking at in our particular project is the question, how does worldview work in human life? Because every human has beliefs and passions and desires which sort of shape the way they encounter other people.
Dr. Cooling's concern about what was lacking in UK religious and science education sparked his interest in Dr. Reiss's initiative and in furthering the inclusion of a worldviews approach in the classroom.
It was the interest which the religious curriculum stimulated in the youngsters in a way that I found wasn't there in the science curriculum. And I really was grabbed by that opportunity to develop children's inquiry and their sort of thinking skills around religion and diversity and all these big issues that we have in the world today. And we have to understand, for example, the importance of the context in which we grow up and how that influences the way we think. We have to understand that over time, our worldview will develop and change, and that's part of the human experience.
Sarah Lane Cawte is the current chair of the Religious Education Council of England and Wales, and she's the education officer for the Free Churches Group of England and Wales, a chaplaincy organization. Worldviews matter, she says, because
the questions are at the centre. What do I believe? Why do I believe it? How was the world created? All sorts of questions are really important, but if we're to equip young people to be active citizens and to have an informed approach to the world, we have to equip them to ask the big questions and to value the questions that they ask. I think that's the really fundamental point about putting students at the centre of an inquiry. Their questions are important and really illuminating. We have to help them to be able to ask the questions, and they can ask amazing questions. This whole project is about equipping those questions and really encouraging them to carry on asking big questions throughout their lives, not just while they're at school.
what does this team mean by worldview? Cawte says,
so nobody stands nowhere. It means that all of us approach the world with a particular view. So our worldview doesn't start from nothing. We all have beliefs, we all have ideas. Nobody believes nothing. We don't live in a vacuum. And our worldview is influenced by all sorts of things. It might be influenced by our upbringing. It might be influenced by the people we have around us. It might be influenced by the country in which we live. And it might be influenced by an institutional religion or belief.
a worldviews approach expands traditionally taught religious education, says Dr. Cooling.
We use the definition that worldview has two major forms. One is what we call organised worldviews, which are the sort of traditions. So there are Christian versions of worldviews, there are Islamic versions, there are Hindu versions. So that's one dimension of it. And the other dimension is that everybody has what we're calling a personal worldview, which is their own, if you like, deep-seated commitments and desires and all those things that I outlined before that drive them and motivate them. And what we're looking at is how those two meet in the classroom. So it's a sort of encounter between personal worldview and organised worldview.
Like Dr. Cooling, Stephen Pett has spent years teaching kids in religious education classrooms. Now, as a national advisor for religious education today, and part of the Big Questions in the Classroom, or Be Quick Worldviews initiative, Pett adds,
we're not losing a focus on organised traditions and what religions have done and thought over centuries, millennia, but we're exploring that and exploring the relationship between that and how people live. So we're sort of widening the lens on it rather than dropping something out. The Be Quick project allowed us to begin to introduce the idea that you can ask different kinds of questions in the classroom and investigate them in different ways, using different methods, using different disciplines. It's not just assuming just because we've always looked at 6 major world religions, idealized versions of religion as if there's one Islam or one Judaism. We should continue to do that.
A wiser way forward, he says, is recognizing that
it's about being open and transparent about our subjectivity, if you like, rather than assuming that somehow we can be objective. If we're just talking about worldviews, for example, then people might think that's about non-religion. So it actually draws non-religious worldviews in as a focus of study, and that obviously includes the non-religious worldviews of pupils themselves. So that means that rather than always looking at things that are outside the pupils themselves, it's saying, well, what about you? And then if this is your non-religious worldview, what are the influences on it? How is it shaped? It's actually about making it more about the reality of pupils' lives, whether they're religious or non-religious. Whereas actually we're saying a religion and worldviews approach explores both religion and non-religion and recognises that actually there's not a clear boundary between those two. There might be some people who identify within a tradition, but actually they have a fluid relationship with non-religion as well. And likewise, people who are non-religious, who are quite happy to have some supernatural beliefs or some practices they might have inherited from religious worldviews. Being aware of other people's worldviews and perspectives then will help us to understand each other better and to get along better as well.
opening space for diversity of beliefs has a positive impact outside the classroom, Pett says.
So I think it's not just about revitalising a subject, it's saying this is something that's really essential for children and young people in the world today. It is about drawing attention to how we know things, how we find out, how we learn. It's about equipping teachers and pupils to think for themselves, to draw on the thinking in the past, but not just accept it as a given, to think about the best ways to learn, the best ways to know, and to think about how you then check whether what you've found out is reliable or true or valid or credible, rather than just to be told, this is the way to think.
Gillian Georgiou, a diocesan religious education advisor for the Lincoln Diocesan Board of Education and another team leader for the Religion and Worldviews project, reinforces Pett's point. Incorporating worldviews into curriculum, she says, does not mean discounting the importance of educating children about world religions.
There is some knowledge that it is helpful for children and young people to have. So are there particular things children and young people really do need to know to be able to navigate this area of the world? We're like tapestries woven of many different threads. And for several billion people on this planet, one of those threads is religion. So it is crucial, if you want to be able to engage in a diverse, open, global society, to understand something about that particular thread. So we're not throwing that away, but we are then asking them to scrutinise that knowledge. Where does it come from? Who decided that that's what you should know? And what do we need to know about them to help us understand why they've said you need to know that? And what difference does that make to you and your engagement of the world? How does it make you look at the world differently? How does it make you want to act in the world? So it is almost taking that content, that knowledge, and then perhaps bringing it alive, empowering it, and sending children out into the world to be able to use it to make the world a better place. Our subject draws on multiple academic disciplines, including theology, religious studies, social sciences, history, philosophy. We are trying to help children engage with human ways of believing and living and thinking.
How does Georgiou define worldview?
We would understand a worldview to be both something that a person might have and something that they might occupy, that they might experience the world through. It's an integral part of what it means to be human, but beyond that, what it means to be part of an interconnected global entity that is teeming with life. Worldview starts with people. So that might either be people as objects of study in the classroom with a real tight focus on the lived reality, the global reality, but it can also be people as interpreters of the world around them, the beliefs, the convictions, the values that shape your way of understanding the world, but also the way in which you actually live your embodied life in the world, and also the way that you think or reason about the world.
Educators like Georgiou say that the more students feel that their worldview, whether religious or non-religious, has a place in the religious education classroom, the more open they'll be to dialogue about any subject, with other students, with their teachers, and ultimately as responsible adult citizens. So does embracing worldviews in the classroom help equip students with the skills they need not just for school, but for modern life? Katie Gooch, another educator in the initiative and a primary Religion Worldviews curriculum writer and teacher, says it does.
One of the things that we need to teach as part of a religious education curriculum or religion and worldviews curriculum is that idea that we can have informed and respectful conversations. So people start to learn the right ways or the respectful ways to ask those kind of questions. And sometimes questions are going to come up that are uncomfortable, and pupils can deal with those in quite grown-up ways if we give them the language, the opportunities and the skills to do that.
Gooch underscores that worldviews curriculum should be intellectually demanding of the students, as world religion curriculum is.
Religious education really needs to have a scholarly basis to it if we want our pupils to be able to access a curriculum that challenges them and is academically rigorous. Pupils are coming into the classroom with their own perspective on something, and actually the content of our curriculum can change that perspective. Now, we can't make assumptions about how it's going to change that perspective because everybody is different and pupils are going to progress at different rates. But sometimes they are going to come out of that classroom with a different point of view or understanding something in much more depth, which they can take out into the world with them.
Georgiou says that part of the value of religion and worldviews is the challenge that it offers students.
It allows them to deal with complexity and understand that that is not a bad thing. It enables them to understand that within a particular worldview community, humanist, Muslim, Sikh, different people do it differently. It helps them understand that context plays a huge role in how people believe and live and think. And those things were largely missing from our previous way of teaching this subject.
So how was the Be Quick Religion and Worldviews initiative created? What did the participants intend it to do? Lane Cawte says,
giving students agency is a central pedagogical requirement in this approach. It's about valuing students because they are human beings. It's very much putting students and teachers on an equal footing. We can all learn from each other.
Developing it depended on the team
talking to lots of different people from academia, from faith and belief traditions, from teaching positions, from university departments for education, and bringing people together to have these conversations to say, what does this mean for the classroom? How can we bring all this expertise together to enrich the experience that young people have? The curriculum frameworks, they're designed to inspire teachers to say, what do our students need? How can we do something like this with our students? What are the real things that are exciting for them, that are relevant to their own experience and the places in which they live?
Stephen Pett says the process of developing such frameworks is valuable in itself, and actually using the frameworks means the benefits increase exponentially.
To push change along, we need to talk to people, we need to listen to questions and queries that they've got, but we need to go beyond just the theory and think about what does it look like in practice. And so to do that, we need to provide ideas and resources and activities, strategies they can use in the classroom, and to see those, whether they work with pupils. If they work with pupils, then teachers are persuaded by it. And so I think there's both something about moving things along in terms of the national conversation, but also working at grassroots with teachers in classrooms, with children and young people, and thinking about what impact it has on how they understand the world.
Dr. Cooling, too, believes that worldviews inclusion in religious education curriculum can help students become capable national citizens who can tolerate, even welcome, differing opinions.
To provide an experience of encountering religion and non-religious traditions in ways that help the children develop their own personal identity, so they understand themselves and their own relationships to belief and religion. Generally, in this country and all over the world, in my experience, people are finding it harder and harder to talk to each other sensibly and without conflict about difference in religious belief. So I think it's really important that young people are helped to be comfortable with where they are and comfortable with where other people are, and to be able to converse in a scholarly way, I would say, about that. And that seems to me to be one of the things that schools should be helping young people to do.
Marianne Cutler, Director for Policy and Curriculum Innovation at the Association for Science Education, expands on the importance of offering students opportunities for scholarly exploration, not least because even though the inclusion of worldviews might be relatively new, the value of grappling with complexity certainly is not.
One might say we're talking about critical thinking here.
Cutler uses another term for how that critical thinking is handled in the worldviews and religious education curriculum: dialogic teaching. It's an advanced professional skill.
What that means is where the teacher facilitates proper constructive dialogue with the children and the children with each other. So working in small groups and as whole class with the teacher, giving the sorts of purposeful questions where the children can, through discussion and purposeful activities that facilitate that discussion, they can come to discuss their own viewpoints. And in science, this is very important, that the views, they're able to reason them, they're able to argue them, and it's all based around the evidence that they're looking at, presented by the teacher, not the answers given, but different ways in which the evidence is presented. The children then discuss it and come to their own views, which they have to reason and articulate as to why they think what they do. Dialogic teaching also enables children to have a view. As long as it's reasoned, they can argue it through, but it focuses much less on the right and wrong. It enables children to look at questions which actually are more interesting, the why sorts of questions and the how sorts of questions, not really the what and the yes, no.
Cutler says dialogic teaching challenges and benefits everyone in the classroom.
Children, they really respond to this. Their views are taken into account, but also that they're able to change their minds, change other people's minds, others within the class, and that other children look at them and appreciate them for their views because they've reasoned them. It gives space for children to stand back and come to their own conclusions because they've had time, facilitated importantly by the teacher, to look at how they're developing their evidence base, their knowledge and conceptual understanding, their inquiry skills, how they're building it, because they're given time to do. That's one of the features of dialogic teaching, that the teacher has to stand back. It's difficult, teachers say, to stand back and not come forward and either give the answer themselves or expect an answer pretty quickly because time is of the essence. It actually works better if the teacher is able to stand back a little and give children time to reflect and then to come forward with a response that they are happy to give. Students, young people who traditionally haven't necessarily shown that they like science or that they've particularly engaged with science, to come forward. And they do that. They do give their own views, and teachers tell us they're surprised because children are responding in ways that they hadn't thought they would.
Like Cutler, Dr. Cooling says that students and teachers alike feel the value of the Worldviews framework.
I think it's a change of mindset, because I think a lot of teachers have been schooled in the idea that they are information transmitters. They have to refocus on seeing the information as being important because of what it stimulates in the pupil's exploration of life. Once you open conversation up with young people, yes, unanticipated questions come. And the skilled teacher will not be threatened by that, because they'll be able to say, well, okay, I don't know the answer to that, let's go away and find out, which actually is a very important modelling of, to me, scholarly attitudes. The fact that you say when you don't know and you set out to try and find out how you get the answers to those sorts of unexpected questions.
How might this curriculum shift and the Worldviews framework impact the future of education? Dr. Reiss says that the Be Quick project gives him hope.
Countries around the world vary a lot, but in the West, one of the disappointing things in the last few decades is that young people have less and less agency. They have less and less choice, sometimes quite literally in terms of which subjects they do, but also within each classroom having much ability to decide how they learn about a topic. And one of the things about the Be Quick, the Big Questions in Classrooms initiative, is that it just tried slightly to shift the dial a bit, to give young people a little bit more opportunity to behave as people, to have some choice and agency. So I'm always optimistic, which is a character flaw, some people would say, of mine. But I think in education, genuinely, there are really good reasons for optimism, actually. It's allowed both teachers and students to feel a bit more comfortable about acknowledging they don't know. And the real optimists would say it can then lead to more of a sort of a community in a classroom where the teacher is genuinely working with the students.
Gillian Georgiou might share Reiss's optimism, but she also recognizes that expanding curriculum and teaching methods requires time, investment, and the willingness of educators to ask questions about everything, starting with themselves.
It's disrupting for the teachers, because the very first thing they have to do when they use our framework to help them plan units of study is to reflect on their own worldview, to reflect on their own position and how their position might influence how they present content in the classroom. And that is then influencing the choices they make when they plan their lessons. We are encouraging children to not just take things on face value. We are asking them to consider context, complexity, differing positions on the same thing. We are asking them to scrutinise themselves and to critically analyse their own responses to some of these questions. We're also asking the teachers to do the same. It could not happen without being open to big questions. They can see the huge value of this. They think it's made them better as reflexive practitioners. They are more aware of their own biases and how that is impacting on the choices they make in the classroom, and they are adjusting for those more effectively.
It's not just the teachers who are changing. Georgiou says
they are really perhaps slightly surprised at the impact that it's had on the children and young people. So the young people are really excited, really engaged, really challenged by it, and that is helping them flourish as engaged young people in an open society. So that's had a real impact. Pupils were more engaged in the content that they were learning about. Many of them understood that it had relevance to their own lives. And previously, we know the majority of people in this country identify as non-religious. So for many young children, they don't see the point of RE. Why would I have to learn about religion? It's not relevant to me. Moving it towards this approach is helping them understand that they themselves are not neutral. So by engaging with this content, they are able to have a more critically reflexive understanding of themselves as well. And they really valued thinking about the why that sits behind their own way of engaging in the world. But one of the big impacts that happened very quickly was that we had children and young people coming to the teachers and saying, "Oh, I see me. I've never seen me before in the classroom." And that's making them feel valued. And as a result, they are more interested, they are more curious, they are asking more questions. And through asking those questions, they are engaging with worldviews that perhaps are unfamiliar with them. So we are seeing that impact very early on.
Sarah Lane Cawte says she's also seen the long-term benefits of a Religions and Worldviews framework.
If students feel that their views are valuable and that they have something to bring to the classroom, that's really empowering, and it actually values them as people I think that's a fundamental stepping stone in building engaged young people who will be able to carry on and use that in whatever they go on to do. So I think anyone who is really well educated, it doesn't matter about their intellectual abilities, but if they've had a good education, they've had a high quality education in religion and worldviews, they will flourish.
Marianne Cutler points to another, perhaps surprising positive impact.
It's not just the more able children, they get a lot from our programme, but also those who traditionally are less interested in science or less able. We have teachers telling us that their children who have particular, we say, special educational needs, they make more progress in a sort of intervention such as this than they do with the more traditional ways of teaching science in primary schools.
Not least because this refreshed educational approach has a positive impact on so many diverse students. Cutler emphasizes how important it is to the future, not just of education, but of humanity.
It's increasingly important, or let's say increasingly needs to be seen as important by governments, because we, of course, have huge challenges, global challenges that climate change, the climate crisis, sustainability, water quality, homelessness being, etc., which we know now cannot be addressed by looking through one lens. So we owe it to children to, from an early age, to show them the richness and complexities, but also the satisfaction of looking at their learning through different lenses and helping them to join their learning together and their understanding through their experience of programs such as this. We enable them to see that actually they can get different perspectives, and they tell us, the children, they look at things in a different way because they've looked at it from a different angle, because they use different tools and skills, which of course bring in your own worldview, your own personal perspectives, and that's enabling children to do that comfortably, and accepting all of that also enables children to move forward.
Gillian Georgiou offers the most powerful reason to further the Be Quick mission.
It is the difference between seeing a child as an empty box that you fill full of factual information and ask them to simply regurgitate, and making them into engaged and committed human beings. It's the difference between seeing them as empty humans and helping them to become something more humane, I think. Engaged, curious, connected with the world around them.
We hope you'll come back in 2 weeks for another new episode. In the meantime, please share the Stories of Impact podcast with someone you think would love it. And we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch at storiesofimpact.org. This has been the Stories of Impact podcast, with interviews by Richard Sergey. Written and produced by Tavia Gilbert for Talkbox Productions. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Executive producer Michelle Cobb. The Stories of Impact podcast is generously supported by Templeton World Charity Foundation.